The codling moth is clearly the #1 fruit infesting insect in North America, but another group that is close behind in terms of damaging various kinds of fruiting crops and a wider range of fruiting crops are various kinds of flies. Now, there are two kinds of flies that are known as fruit flies. They occur in two different orders. One are the true fruit flies, if you will, in the order Tephrididae. These are often about housefly size. They have pictured wings, meaning they've got patterns on the wings that are used to identify them. The other group of flies that are called fruit flies are much smaller. The small fruit flies or vinegar flies, most often encountered by people in overripe fruit, in perhaps even the kitchen. The latter are generally far less damaging than the former, at least worldwide, although we do have a special issue with a small fruit fly known as the spotted-winged Drosophila that we'll talk about in just a bit. If we're talking about the true fruit flies in the order Tephrididae, these picture-wing flies, the insect that's been probably most important here in Colorado is the western cherry fruit fly. There are two cherry fruit flies in North America. The western cherry fruit fly, which is primarily out here, but we also get a little of the eastern cherry fruit fly, which extends off to the east. There are differences in terms of what these two fruit fly will use as hosts. The western cherry fruit fly will use all cultivated and wild cherries, whereas the eastern cherry fruit fly will just use sweet, tart, and black cherries. Now, the western cherry fruit fly, which is primarily a problem at this point in time in Colorado, west of the Continental Divide, from Steamboat Springs down through the Tri-Rivers area, is an insect that will pupate in the overwintering stage, and it will be under debris or in loose soil. And it is going to be an insect that is only going to produce one generation. But the adults will be active and present when you start to see the fruit beginning to mature. About 5 weeks before harvest is when the adults emerge from these overwintering pupae. And they will be out and about on the plants. They'll be feeding primarily in honeydew and fluids, and particularly sweet fluids they can find available. They'll mate, and then after this point the females will begin to lay eggs. The eggs are going to be inserted just under the skin of the developing fruit, in this case the developing cherries. Now, if we want to manage the cherry fruit fly, one thing we can do is trap it. Trap it to find out when it's active, so we can employ appropriate measures at that time, but also to see if it's present, and to some degree to even kill some insects through the use of these traps. The trap we use for the western cherry fruit fly is a yellow sticky trap. It also has, if you want to get the best capture, a bait, a protein hydrolysate bait. So it will not only be sticky, but it'll be sticky, a little bit brown, it'll have an odor to it. And this is attractive to the adults that are looking for food and also looking for a little bit of protein, and so that's a pretty good trap. You can get an idea of when the adults are out and about, including the females. Many females are being caught on these traps. Now, this is an insect that is pretty serious, and it may involve the need to spray for prevention of significant damage that may make a crop very badly damaged. So the trapping can identify when the adults are active, and the timing for this insect in terms of insecticide use would be at this period. What you want to do is be able to kill adults when they're out and about. After the larvae are, after the eggs have been laid and the larvae are underneath the fruit, you can't get them. So we're targeting the adults. There are some options, and for homeowners, spinosad-based sprays or baits are most accessible and what we would recommend. And the spinosad products are available in a lot of formulations, including some that are allowed to be used in certified organic production. If you look around, there's also a bait formulation, a formulation that's incorporates spinosad in a carrier that is attractive to the adults to feed on it. You would use less active ingredient, less of the insecticide, and it would be a little bit better targeted. It's under the formulation GF120. Now, the larvae are going to develop in the flesh of the fruit, and when full grown, they'll drop to the ground. And this obviously is the period when they are damaging the fruit, and after they have finished damaging the fruit, they complete the development. So we may also be able to target this insect at this point in time too. The larvae drop to the ground, and the kind of surface that we have underneath the plants, in this case maybe a cherry tree, can have a great deal of effect in terms of how well they survive. Some studies have shown that a dense understory of plants, clovers, grasses, and the like will increase the activity of other insects in the site, so that the pupae of the fruit flies, when they drop to the ground, will often be eaten, so it increases predation. Another way you could do is just keep the pupae from even reaching the ground, and if you had a fabric barrier underneath these trees, the larvae would drop from the fruit. They would attempt to find a place in which to pupate, and the fabric barrier, if appropriately applied, would prevent them from reaching the soil to successfully pupate. And again, they would die. But this is an insect that is one generation a year, and again, the primary thing that we want to keep in mind is the period when they are laying eggs. There's a lot of things that can be done at that time in terms of trapping and in terms of insecticides if we wish to go that route. Now, there is another fruit fly in this same family, the Tephrididae, these picture-wing flies, that is, for most of North America, better known and more important, the apple maggot, an insect that has a wide host range, native to North America. The apple maggot hosts include hawthorn, and that is the native host. What's happened with apple maggot is that it was an insect that was always here in North America on native hawthorn, and when apple was brought into this continent, some of them moved to apple. There are still strains, though, that are strictly hawthorn infesting strains, but there are some that are in apple, crab apple, and interestingly, here in the eastern Colorado, we've seen some that are quite important in cherries and plum. They're rare in pear, but it does have a wide host range, and it can be very variable depending on where you are in terms of what they're going to attack. Similar to the western cherry fruit fly, the adults will insert their eggs into the developing fruit when it's immature, and this makes a little puncture wound when they're laying the eggs. And in the case of apple, you might see this in the form of dimpling. So the apple here in the lower right has a dimpled texture, and those little areas that are sunken are areas where eggs had been laid earlier by an apple maggot. The larvae that develop from these eggs then tunnel through the flesh. They are quite small, much smaller than a codling moth, and less conspicuous. And they are a dipteran larvae, which is easily told because they don't have a distinct head and they don't have any legs. But you'll see little tracks running through the flesh of an infested fruit. And in apples, these are sometimes called railroad worms because they make these dark tracks, I guess, kind of like a railroad track. The pupa is the overwintering stage, just like with the western cherry fruit fly. It occurs under some covering debris or in loose soil very near a previously infested tree. Now, yellow sticky cards can be used to monitor flight activity of adult apple maggot as well. And again, these traps that have not only yellow color, a sticky surface, but also include a protein hydroxylate bait can be particularly effective in capturing the adults when they're first out. But there's also work with this insect that shows that after the insect has is attracted to the yellow color, which is what the females are attracted to in the first week or two of their adult life. They are then more attracted to a kind of image that approximates a large apple, a red sphere. And so you will find for apple maggot something that is sold as perhaps a super apple or just an apple maggot trap that is actually one of the best examples of where we can actually control an insect through use of a trap. These highly attractive apples that are attractive to the females during the time that they're laying eggs can be used to eliminate a large number of them before they have laid eggs in the main crop. And it may only take 2 or 3 per tree to effectively control this insect. But this is pretty much only effective against the apple maggot, which again is an insect that is only sporadically present in this part of the country as a problem in backyard apples and other fruit crops, tree fruit crops. Now, let's move on to the new insect pest of fruit that is causing quite a lot of problem and could be a big actor, called the spotted-winged Drosophila, Drosophila suzuki'i. This is an insect that has fairly recently entered North America within the last 15 years, and in Colorado within the last 6 years. It is a member of the vinegar fly or small fruit fly family, so it's not one of the true fruit flies with picture wings. It's one of these small fruit flies, these fruit flies that we most commonly see, again, in overripe fruit in our kitchen, perhaps in late summer. But there's lots of these small fruit flies, or these vinegar flies, in the genus Drosophila, and almost all of them develop on the yeast associated with ripening or overripe fruit. So we'll see them in overripe peaches or bananas. And this is an insect that I very commonly have in my own house. And the little trap that I have indicated on the right is just a little simple homemade trap made of beer or perhaps a little water with some mushed banana that attracts them, and you make a little funnel, and it works fairly well to trap quite a few of them. But this fly, the spotted-winged Drosophila, is a different actor. It is a direct pest of fruit, as I'll get to. And first of all, let's talk about how it's different. It's in this genus Drosophila, but the way it gets its name is there is a feature on the males that involves a spotting of the wing. So the males have a dark spot. Other Drosophila do not have a dark spot on the wing. Now the female of the spotted-winged Drosophila does not have a dark spot. She does have an ovipositor, the structure that allows her to lay eggs, that is considerably stouter and larger than other Drosophila, which allows her to insert her eggs into fruit that is intact, not fruit that is still ripening. And that's why this insect, unlike the common fruit flies, the small fruit flies, the vinegar flies we have, is much more important. It is a direct pest. It can develop in ripening fruit, not just overripe fruit. So spotted-winged Drosophila, and this SWD is the contraction that you'll often see, will lay eggs on intact but ripening fruit. The life cycle after the eggs have been laid is pretty rapid. So the eggs will hatch within 3 days. The larvae will then feed on the fruit, and that might take a week. They'll pupate either inside or drop to the ground, inside the fruit or drop to the ground, and then you have adults that are out and about for almost a month. And there are multiple generations that are produced by this. We see the adults first showing up sometime around late June, but they're usually not all that common until sometime in the middle of July. But what happens when the larvae develop in the fruit that they are associated with is that the fruit rapidly softens. These are associated with bacteria that help degrade the tissues around them, make it softer, and make it ripen quicker, but also break down very quickly. and the larvae do very well in this soup of rapidly over-ripening fruit. So if we're looking for spotted-winged Drosophila, this insect that is fairly new to this area, again, certainly within the last 6 or 7 years, you'll see small maggots in ripening fruit, and associated with this will be extraordinarily rapid softening. The kinds of fruit that we're talking about that are affected by this insect are raspberries, blackberries, strawberries, the small fruits. This is an insect that's not particularly common or damaging to larger fruits, so you can find it in many kinds of fruits, as we'll talk about, but raspberries are the number one that we're seeing damage to. And if you can catch the adults, the male will have a spot on its wing, which will confirm that that is what you have. And these are insects that can be trapped pretty well. There are traps that are used commonly for this insect that are easily made. They're attracted to vinegar or Merlot wine. And you could make some sort of trap with a few holes in the side, maybe a cover to keep the rain out, and some kind of bait, the apple cider vinegar or Merlot wine on the bottom, and then see what you catch. And this is quite effective. It's best to put them in a shaded area within the crop canopy. And if your question is, do I have spotted-winged Drosophila in my garden or not, then these traps will tell you pretty quickly, within a few weeks after you put them out, if they're out and about. Now, this new insect to small fruit has brought some problems in terms of management. This is not an insect that has proved to be easy to control. And the kinds of controls that we have at this point in time will help a lot, but may not be fully adequate for most people. The first thing we recommend is to thoroughly and frequently pick ripening fruit. So pick all ripe fruit regularly, 2 to 3 times weekly. And why are you doing this? Is because you're trying to prevent the larvae from completing their development in these ripening berries. They may have laid their eggs in the ripening berry, and there may be small larvae in them, but if you can get them out before a week or so, the larvae will not allow themselves to develop. And then refrigerate them. And as soon as you refrigerate them, you will stop their development and perhaps even kill them if it's low enough. In the low 30s, they'll usually not survive a low chill. On the other hand, we do have an issue that makes this practice a little problematic, and that is that there are many fruits that are hosts of spotted-winged Drosophila. So you may be picking your raspberries or picking your strawberries very thoroughly and doing a good job of that, but there is the possibility, if you have other plants in your yard that are hosts, that they could be harbored in those areas too. So the question on how important are the fruits produced by trees, shrubs as food sources for this new insect pest of berry crops, well, it can be fairly important. Spotted-winged Drosophila feeds on a lot of different kinds of fruit, and raspberries, blackberries, strawberries are the big ones that we worry about. But there are other fruit that you might have in your yard that are also hosts. Honeysuckle, elderberries, yew, ripe crab apples and apples, not the hard ones, hawthorn, at least some cotoneaster. There are some fruit, Russian olive, viburnum, that don't seem to support spotted-winged Drosophila, but you will get some development on some of these other fruits. So perhaps those also should be picked and dealt with if you're trying to have a crop of a susceptible raspberry, blackberry, or strawberry crop that you're trying to keep free of this insect. So another issue, after you've thought about and considered whether it works, and the thoroughly and frequently picked ripening fruit option is to give up and shift to earlier bearing cultivars. This is an insect that is active mostly in the latter part of the summer. There's far higher populations in August and September than there would be in June. So a early crop of raspberries and early crop of strawberries would almost entirely avoid serious damage by this insect. Insecticides, well, there are insecticides that are used. In fact, quite a lot of insecticides are used. For homeowners, pretty much the only option you have is spinosad. This is a product, a natural product for what that's worth. It is quite good on flies, and it can be used effectively if it's applied during periods when the adults are out and about. However, this is an insect that brings up a real concern in terms of using insecticide and minimizing non-target effects, and that is that the kinds of crops we're talking about, caneberry crops such as raspberries or strawberries, are ones that are continuously in bloom. And when you're continuously in bloom, you're being visited by pollinators. So this is a conflict we see that it is going to be difficult to manage correctly and has to be done appropriately if you even want to consider use of insecticides. Insecticides can be used, or at least spinosad can be used effectively to control spider-winged Drosophila with minimum effects on pollinators if, but only if, it's applied in a way that is going to avoid direct contact to visiting pollinators. So, these insecticides should only be applied at evening after bees have visited for the day. They last about 3 hours, but they're active for 3 hours, and so if you applied it during the day, you would be killing pollinators that visited at that time. And this is indicated on the label. If you were to use a spinosad product for this insect, it specifically indicates that you need to have at least a 3-hour interval after it is applied to avoid any adverse effects of the pollinators that might be visiting this. So it must only be applied at dusk. A little bit different than some of the other situations we have in terms of yards and gardens. It's one that is going to be a difficult message for many people to get through their minds, but this is a treatment that should only be used if you are going to play by the rules and only apply it after dusk.